In the heart of colonial plantations, hidden behind the imposing walls of the big house, there was a space no one dared to mention out loud. A forbidden room, a place of closed doors, where the silence of the slave quarters turned into fear, and where the dirtiest secrets of the plantation master were carefully concealed. This room was not just a chamber, but a symbol of absolute power, of the torment of the night, of pain that spread like an invisible chain throughout the plantation. For centuries, whispered stories among the enslaved spoke of women torn from their precarious homes, taken by force, watched by the overseer, trapped by the invisible shackles of obedience. Inside, far from the eyes of the community, whip and humiliation mixed with the perversity of power. What happened in that room remained locked in collective memory, like an open wound that crossed generations. Today, in this video, we will open the door to that forbidden room. We will reveal the secrets history tried to hide and understand how the cruel past of the slave quarters and the big house still echoes in the present. You will discover how this space became the setting for sexual violence against enslaved women, for the birth of the so-called children of silence, and for the resistance that sprouted even on ground stained with fear. Prepare yourself, because this is not just a journey into the past, it is a mirror of the present. What seemed buried under the rubble of slavery is still alive, shaping destinies, marking families, and feeding power structures that insist on surviving. Stay with me until the end, because only by opening the door of that forbidden room will we understand how to break the invisible chains that still imprison our society. The colonial plantation was a universe divided into two worlds that never met on equal terms. On one side, the big house, imposing, built on top of a hill so that everyone could see who the true master of power was. Its white walls reflected the sun, and its red-tiled roof revealed the imported luxury from Europe. It was the space of abundance, control, and ostentation. There lived the plantation master with his family, surrounded by comfort, fine rugs, noble wood furniture, and dishes served in abundance. Every detail of the big house was designed to display the supremacy of those who dominated the land and the people who worked on it. On the other side, almost always hidden at the back of the property, was the slave quarters. Dark, suffocating, made of clay, wood, and straw, it was the forced shelter of the enslaved, a place where dozens of men, women, and children were crammed in inhumane conditions. The cracked walls let in the cold night wind and rain, and the dirt floor was the only mattress for tired bodies marked by whips, stocks, and pillories. If the big house was the symbol of power, the slave quarters were the portrait of submission, two worlds only a few yards apart, but separated by an abyss of pain and inequality. The plantation master reigned supreme, owner of the land, of the enslaved, of time itself, and even of lives that depended on his will. He decided who would be punished at the stocks, chained in shackles, bound by iron chains, or exposed at the pillory before all as a lesson in obedience. The overseer, the master's right hand, watched every step. He prowled the slave quarters with a stern gaze and whip in hand, ready to impose the torment of the night when the mill's production did not meet demands. No one escaped control. Men were beaten until they fainted, women humiliated and forced to serve not only in the fields, but also inside the big house. This contrast between wealth and misery became even crueler during the workday. The enslaved were taken to the fields before sunrise, with iron chains on their feet or shackles on their ankles, forced to cut cane, carry logs, grind sugar under the scorching sun. The sound of the whip cutting through the air mixed with the moans of those who no longer had the strength to continue. And still there was no pause, no compassion. To work until collapse was the rule, not the exception. Every enslaved body was seen as a machine of production, disposable, replaceable. The slave quarters were the place of forced rest, but also of silent resistance. There, among groans and muffled songs, stories, prayers, and hopes were born. Many remembered the slave ships, where they had been torn from Africa, separated from their families, chained during the voyage of death. That past still echoed in memories and reinforced the desire for freedom. On nights of full moon, when the overseer seemed to rest, voices whispered about escapes, about quilombos, about a life beyond the shadow of the big house. The fear was great, but hope was greater still. Yet there was something no one dared speak of openly. Within the walls of the big house, beyond luxury and display, there existed a dark space, locked behind heavy doors. A room not shown to visitors, not described by European travelers, but known to all in the slave quarters only by hearsay. This place was wrapped in mystery and silence. Some said it was used for secret punishments. Others claimed it was there that the master committed his darkest crimes. Women feared being summoned by the overseer at nightfall, for they knew that the path to the big house might have no return. The torment of the night did not happen only with the whip in the yard or with the stocks in plain view. There were hidden pains, silent humiliations, and they were tied to that forbidden room. This contrast between the luxury of the big house and the misery of the slave quarters was not only physical, but also symbolic. While the plantation master celebrated banquets, enslaved people begged for a piece of bread. While the elite family slept in soft beds, the bodies in the slave quarters lay on the cold floor, sharing space with rats and insects. Yet the greatest abyss was not in food or rest, but in the dignity stolen day after day. The slave quarters reflected visible oppression. The forbidden room, on the other hand, was the reflection of hidden oppression. It was in this divided universe that the mystery began to take shape. The big house showed its facade of power, but hid secrets not even the pillory, the whip, or the stocks revealed. The slave quarters felt it, but could not denounce it. And while the overseer prowled, the rumors grew. The forbidden room existed, and each night when a door closed, the entire slave quarters plunged into silence. A silence that was not only fear, but forced complicity, for all knew that screaming would do no good. And it is into that silence that we will now dive. Because to understand the weight of slavery, it is not enough to observe the whips in the daylight. It is necessary to open the doors of the night and discover what happened behind the walls of the big house. That is where the true story of the forbidden room begins. On that plantation, as in so many others scattered across the interior of colonial Brazil, there was a place that did not appear in inventories or in travelers' descriptions. A locked room with thick walls, away from the main corridors of the big house. Its solid wooden door, reinforced with iron hinges, seemed ordinary to those who did not know what went on inside. But for the enslaved in the slave quarters, this space carried a weight heavier than the stocks or the pillory. It represented fear, silence, and hidden violence. Rumors about the forbidden room spread in whispers. At night, when the overseer appeared at the door of the slave quarters and called a woman by name, everyone knew what her fate would be. Silence grew heavy, broken only by the muffled cries of mothers praying quietly that their daughters would not be next. The children, not fully understanding, looked on in fear, while the men lowered their heads, powerless to protect those they loved. The path to the big house, lit by torches and candelabras, was walked in slow steps, each marked by the sound of dragging shackles or the stern gaze of the overseer. Inside the slave quarters, the fear was collective. It was known that the torment of the night was not just whips, stocks, or iron chains. There were humiliations carried out in secret, far from all eyes, hidden behind that door. The forbidden room thus became a symbol of something even more cruel, the absolute power of the plantation master over bodies and destinies. If the punishments in the yard served as public spectacle, in the forbidden room occurred the silent crimes, those that left no visible marks in the light of day, but scarred the soul forever. The first women taken there returned different. Some remained silent for days, their gaze lost, unable to speak. Others came back crying, carrying a weight they could not share with anyone. Some never returned at all, disappearing mysteriously, as if the forbidden room had swallowed them forever. These stories fed the terror, turning the place into a dark legend, but at the same time into a cruel truth. Over time, the enslaved began to create silent signals to warn one another. When the overseer approached the slave quarters at night, a simple hand gesture or glance was enough for all to fall quiet. That silence was not only fear, it was resistance. It was the only way to protect those who might still be spared. The older women, when they sensed that a young girl might be chosen, tried to hide her in the dark corners, cover her with cloths, invent illnesses. But they rarely managed to fool the overseer's pitiless gaze. The forbidden room was also surrounded by symbols. Some said that behind its walls there were claw marks dug into the wood, muffled screams no one dared to repeat, tears that never dried. Others spoke of objects kept inside, whips, chains, a wooden bed, restraining instruments. Everything prepared so violence could be carried out in secret. While the pillory served as a spectacle to affirm authority, the forbidden room served as a hiding place for perversity. Accounts that have survived to this day show that this space was not an exception. Many big houses had similar rooms, always kept out of reach of strangers. Foreign travelers who passed through the plantations saw the sugar mills, the cane fields, the slave quarters, and sometimes even the public punishments. But the forbidden room was never shown. It was a secret guarded under lock and key, protected by the silence imposed on those who suffered inside. This mystery fueled the climate of fear even more. Every time a woman was called, the entire slave quarters sank into despair. The torment of the night was not only physical, it was psychological. The mere sound of a key turning in the lock of the big house was enough to make the hearts of the enslaved race. They knew that inside things happened that could not be spoken, but that were reflected in the empty stares of the women who returned. Over time, the forbidden room began to be mentioned in chants and laments. Songs sung on silent nights carried metaphors about closed doors, silenced cries, and invisible chains. It was a way to record the pain without denouncing it directly, a strategy to keep the memory alive without openly defying the plantation master or overseer. These songs, heavy with melancholy, echoed as cultural resistance, transforming suffering into voice, even if disguised. The forbidden room also served as an instrument of control. The plantation master knew that the fear of being taken there kept everyone on edge. The overseer used this threat as a form of discipline. Just a look or a word was enough for the enslaved to remember the fate that awaited them if they dared to disobey orders. Thus, the space became not only a site of violence, but also a tool of power. And there was one detail that made it even more cruel. Often the plantation master presented himself to society as an honorable man, religious, an example of morality. At Sunday Mass, he sat in the front pews of the church, with his family by his side, revered by all. No one imagined, or pretended not to imagine, that this same man kept a chamber of horrors inside his big house. The contrast between his public facade and private secrets was the very essence of colonial hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the slave quarters lived divided between silence and despair. Some men, filled with rage, dreamed of rebelling, but knew that any attempt meant cruel punishments at the pillory, whipping to death, or even execution. The women, in turn, carried their pain in silence, trying to protect one another. And children grew up hearing these rumors, learning from an early age that life on the plantation was made not only of iron chains and visible shackles, but also of invisible chains that imprisoned the soul. The forbidden room, therefore, was more than a physical space. It was the embodiment of a system that turned human beings into objects. there was revealed the filthiest, most hidden face of slavery, one that did not appear in official records, but that shaped destinies. And it is at this point that our narrative begins to descend deeper, because what happened inside that room cannot be reduced to mere rumors. It was real violence, repeated night after night, etched into bodies and hearts. To understand this, we must fully open the door and see what it meant for enslaved women to be taken to the torment of the night. The torment of the night was not only the crack of the whip on tired bodies, nor the cruel punishments at the stocks or the pillory. It was quieter, more perverse, and therefore more devastating. It happened when the plantation lights went out, when the overseer walked to the slave quarters and called by name a woman chosen by the master. That summons sounded like a sentence. There was no refusing, no escaping. It was the command of absolute power, reinforced by iron chains, shackles, and threats of death. The women knew what awaited them. The walk to the big house was a corridor of humiliation. The overseer led them under the flickering light of torches, while heavy silence reigned in the slave quarters. Husbands wept in silence, powerless. Mothers knelt, whispering prayers. Children, even without fully understanding, felt the weight of the pain in the air. The torment of the night began long before the forbidden room opened. It began in the walk, in the forced gaze to the ground, in the sound of the key turning in the lock. Inside the room, the master exercised what he called his right of possession. To him, these women were not wives, not mothers, not daughters. They were just bodies available to satisfy his perversity. Sexual violence was practiced as an extension of power. The same man who decided who went to the stocks or the pillory also decided who would be humiliated within the hidden walls of the big house. There were no witnesses, only muffled screams, stifled sobs, and the creak of wood that became the involuntary accomplice of barbarity. Often, the torment of the night was accompanied by instruments of control. Whips, ropes, and even small shackles were used to immobilize women who resisted. The forbidden room became a stage for emotional and physical torture, where every detail reminded that the master's power was limitless. The abuse did not end when the door opened. It continued in the psychological scars, in the constant fear, in the trauma that spread through the slave quarters like an invisible chain. Sexual violence was also a strategy of domination. The master knew that by attacking the women, he struck the entire community. Husbands were humiliated, unable to protect their wives. Children grew up traumatized, carrying the weight of a pain they could not understand. The women themselves were reduced to the condition of objects, silenced not only by the fear of death, but by the terror of being marked forever. Thus, the torment of the night became a weapon more effective than the whip. It destroyed dignity. Historical accounts confirm that this practice was common in many plantations. Foreign travelers recorded the extinguished look of enslaved women, the deep sadness they carried, and the whispers about the abuses of the big house. But officially, nothing was said. The torment of the night did not appear in inventories, was not mentioned in letters, was not denounced in courts. It was a dirty secret kept by those who benefited from it. And so, generation after generation, the violence repeated itself as a silent ritual. In the slave quarters, the marks were evident. Some women came back from the forbidden room crying, carrying bruises on their bodies and wounds in their souls. Others returned in complete silence, as if they had lost their voices. There were those who, days later, could not work and were punished at the stocks or pillory, as if the fault were theirs. The torment of the night had no end. It began with abuse, but continued in public humiliation, turning victims into targets of further suffering. And, as if that were not enough, many of these women ended up pregnant. The torment of the night gave birth to children known as children of silence. Children born of violence, rejected by the master, but also looked upon with suspicion in the slave quarters. These children bore on their bodies and faces the marks of a crime no one dared to denounce. For the mothers, they were living reminders of the torment, but they were also innocent lives that had to be protected. The torment of the night, therefore, was not just an individual act of violence. It was a system, a perverse mechanism that kept slavery functioning. It reinforced submission, weakened community bonds, created divisions, and spread fear. The plantation master knew this. The overseer knew this. The slave quarters knew it too, but could not react. Every muffled scream in the forbidden room echoed in everyone's hearts, reminding them that freedom was still very far away. Even so, there was resistance. Some women found ways to survive the trauma. They created quiet support networks, cared for one another, shared prayers and songs that turned pain into hope. In the midst of torment, the strength of solidarity was also born. This silent resistance was an act of courage. It was proof that, even in the face of the cruelest violence, human dignity could not be completely destroyed. The torment of the night was perhaps the most hidden face of slavery. It left not only physical scars, but also shaped mindsets, created collective traumas, and fed the structural racism that persists to this day. Because when a woman's body was treated as an object, all her descendants carried the weight of that violence. The silence imposed in that room still echoes in today's inequalities. And this is where our narrative moves forward, because the torment of the night did not end with stifled sobs. It left marks that went far beyond the moment of abuse. It perpetuated itself in the lives born from that suffering, in the children of silence who emerged as living witnesses to a system of cruelty. It is time to open the next chapter of this story. Now we will speak not only of the hidden suffering, but also of the visible consequences it left behind, because each torment of the night produced not only pain, but also new lives that carried in their blood the secrets of the forbidden room. Between the walls of the big house and the cold floor of the slave quarters, the torment of the night left marks that were not limited to tears or bruises. It left living legacies born months later in silence, bearing in their facial features and skin color the proof of a violence everyone knew about, but no one dared to mention. They were called children of silence, children who did not ask to be born, but who became the cruelest portrait of the hypocrisy of the plantation master and the slave system. These children grew up in a social limbo. They were not accepted as legitimate heirs of the big house, even though they often carried their father's eyes, hair, or light skin. Nor were they seen as equals within the slave quarters, because they were a daily reminder of the abuses committed in the forbidden room. For their mothers, they were beloved children, but also open wounds. Every look at them brought back the memory of the torment of the night, the humiliation, the powerlessness in the face of the overseer's force, and the master's perversity. The lives of these children were marked by contradictions. Some were raised close to the big house, serving as personal attendants, learning small trades, receiving better clothes than those worn by other enslaved people. But this apparent privilege was only another form of control. They grew up being reminded at every turn that they were different, that they belonged to that world in a shameful way, without right to inheritance, without recognition, without a full identity. Other children of silence remained in the slave quarters with their mothers. There, they suffered the stigma of being remembered as the fruit of sexual violence. They were often targets of rejection because their presence laid bare the community's collective pain. The men in the slave quarters saw in these children the humiliation of not having been able to protect their wives. The elder women looked upon them with compassion, but also with sorrow, as if they were living scars of slavery. The silence surrounding these children was deafening. The plantation master never recognized them publicly. To society, they were invisible. They had no surname, no place in official records, no guaranteed future. Some were sold while still small, torn from their mother's arms and sent to other plantations as if they were unwanted merchandise. Others remained, growing up under the overseer's watchful eye, always ready to serve, but never to belong. And there was a further cruel detail. Many of these children became targets of new violence. Girls, daughters of silence upon reaching adolescence, were taken to the same fate as their mothers, summoned to the forbidden room to repeat the story of pain. The cycle seemed endless. Each generation of children of silence fed the machinery of slavery, showing how the torment of the night was not just an individual act, but a continuous system of destroying dignity. Despite all the pain, some mothers found ways to turn silence into resistance. They cared for their children with redoubled love, as if protecting those lives were the only way to defy the power of the big house. They sang to them in the dead of night, taught them stories of Africa, preserved the memory of their ancestors. They did this because they knew that even though they were born of violence, those children had a right to humanity, to hope, to life. The children of silence also represented a paradox for the master himself. He could ignore them publicly, but he could not erase the features that tied them to him. Every time one of these boys or girls walked across the plantation, their very existence exposed the dirty secret of the forbidden room. It was as if the big house tried to hide a stain that became more visible every day. This paradox undermined the image of authority. The plantation master wanted to be seen as a man of faith, head of a family, a pillar of colonial society. But within the walls of his house, he kept children he could never acknowledge. This contradiction corroded the apparent morality of the elite, revealing that slavery was not only economic exploitation, but also a system of intimate perversity. The children of silence grew up without identity, but they carried within themselves living proof of the violence. Many of them, upon reaching youth, became more aware of their condition. Some fled, seeking shelter in quilombos, where they were finally treated as equals. Others rebelled, turning resentment into a force for resistance. There were also those who, even under the control of the big house, never stopped carrying in their eyes the silent indictment of the crime committed against their mothers. The fate of these children shows how the torment of the night went beyond the closed doors of the forbidden room. It shaped entire generations, created divisions within the slave quarters themselves, fueled resentments, and perpetuated inequalities. It was a torment that did not end with the abuse, but lived on in every birth marked by pain. And yet, amid so much darkness, there was a spark of hope. Some children of silence became symbols of resistance. They learned to write, to fight, to organize escapes. They found in the quilombos not only a refuge, but a place to belong. They were children of pain, but also heirs to their mother's courage. With every successful escape, with every act of defiance, they showed that silence could become a voice. These stories reveal that even in the face of the greatest torment, there was room for resistance. The mothers who raised their children amid stigma proved that love was stronger than violence. The children who became leaders in the quilombos showed that identity could be born from pain. The forbidden room, which was meant to be a symbol of power, ended up unintentionally sowing seeds of resistance. And it is precisely at this point that we move to the next chapter. Because if, on one side, the torment of the night and the children of silence revealed the darkest face of slavery, on the other side arose revolts, escapes, and the formation of quilombos, true cities of freedom in the midst of oppression. It was proof that even in the cruelest setting, there were always those who dared to challenge the big house and break the invisible chains. The hidden violence inside the big house did not come without consequences. Every woman taken to the forbidden room, every rejected child of silence, every night of torment, fed a feeling that grew quietly in the slave quarters: revolt. It was a small flame, but impossible to extinguish. The plantation master believed that fear of punishments at the stocks, the pillory, and the crack of the whip would be enough to keep everyone submissive. But he did not understand that suffering also planted seeds of courage. Rebellions began in whispers. On cold nights when the overseer fell asleep, the enslaved gathered in dark corners of the slave quarters. There, away from the eyes of the big house, they spoke of escape, resistance, and freedom. They remembered stories brought from Africa, of ancestors who had been kings, warriors, and priests before being chained in the slave ships. These ancestral memories were fuel for resistance, and many times the women who had suffered in the forbidden room were the first to encourage others not to accept silence forever. Trauma turned into strength. Some women, even after enduring the torment of the night, conspired in secret with their husbands, brothers, and sons. They knew there was no justice inside the big house. The only path was to break the chains, and when an opportunity arose, an overseer's distraction, a rainy night, a lapse in vigilance, they risked their lives in search of freedom. These escapes were dangerous. Anyone captured could be punished to death. The stocks, the pillory, and the whip were used as spectacles to serve as lessons. But even so, many preferred to risk their lives rather than continue living under the terror of the forbidden room. Courage was fueled not only by the desire to escape, but also by the instinct to protect future generations. The children of silence, especially, inspired the need to break the cycle of violence. That was how the quilombos were born, true cities of freedom in the midst of slavery. Hidden deep in the forests, in places difficult to access, the quilombos became refuges for men, women, and children who managed to escape the yoke of the big house. There, people rebuilt their lives, cultivated the land, hunted, and above all, lived without the fear of the overseer or the torment of the night. The quilombos were, at the same time, refuge and resistance. Zumbi dos Palmares became the most famous symbol of this struggle, but he was not the only one. Spread throughout Brazil, hundreds of quilombos arose as direct responses to the violence of the plantations. And in many cases, stories of abuse inside the big house were the trigger for entire groups to risk escape. With every woman violated, with every child rejected, grew the conviction that the slave quarters could no longer remain silent. These communities were hunted with violence. The plantation master and his allies saw the quilombos as a threat to social order. Armed expeditions were sent to destroy these refugees, but many resisted bravely, and even when a quilombo was destroyed, others emerged in different places. The flame of resistance could not be extinguished. Life in the quilombos was not easy. Food was scarce, there were constant threats of attack, and the fear of being captured never disappeared. But even so, they were places of dignity. There, women no longer had to fear the torment of the night. Children were not torn from their mothers' arms to be sold as merchandise. Men did not have to lower their heads before the overseer. In the quilombos, everyone could live as human beings, not as property. The strength of the quilombos also inspired those still bound by the chains of the slave quarters. Rumors that there were places where freedom existed fueled hope. Songs and legends about the quilombolas spread like hidden fire, encouraging the enslaved to resist in every way possible. Even inside the plantations themselves, small acts of rebellion occurred daily, delaying work, hiding tools, sabotaging production. They were discreet ways of saying that slavery never managed to completely suffocate the spirit of resistance. The forbidden room, therefore, was not only a space of pain, it also became fuel for the struggle. Every dirty secret hidden behind its door reinforced the certainty that the big house was not invincible. Iron chains could imprison bodies, but they could not imprison dreams. And it was this conviction that transformed isolated escapes into collective movements, giving rise to the communities that remain to this day as symbols of resistance and identity, the quilombos. However, as much as the quilombos offered shelter, the secret of the Forbidden Room continued to haunt the memories of those who escaped. Many survivors carried the trauma forever, and it was through their testimonies that part of the truth began to be revealed. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, preserved in songs, prayers, and memories, ended up exposing what colonial society preferred to hide, and it is precisely at this point that the narrative takes us to the next chapter, because for a long time, the Forbidden Room was only rumor and whisper. But as decades passed, documents, testimonies, and memories began to concretely reveal what really hid behind those walls. The silence began to break, and the dirty secrets of the plantation master became known. For a long time, the Forbidden Room was just a whispered rumor in the slave quarters, a secret hidden behind the thick walls of the big house. But as decades went by, the truth began to emerge. Accounts preserved in diaries, memories of foreign travelers, judicial documents, and above all, the oral tradition passed down by the descendants of the enslaved began to reveal what happened inside. The silence was broken, and the mask of morality worn by the plantation masters began to crumble. Historians found indirect descriptions in letters and records from the time. Some mentioned reserved chambers or private quarters of the masters, always treated vaguely but full of insinuations. European travelers, curious about the contrast between the wealth of the big house and the misery of the slave quarters, made subtle observations about locked spaces no one dared to show. Few had the courage to write openly, but the repetition of these details in different regions showed that these were not isolated cases. In addition, archaeological excavations on old plantations revealed objects that reinforce these stories. Pieces of iron chains, fragments of shackles, claw marks embedded in wooden doors, rustic beds that looked more like instruments of restraint than furniture for rest. These findings confirm that the Forbidden Room was not just imagination or exaggeration by the enslaved, but a concrete reality kept secret by the colonial elites. Oral testimonies, passed down from generation to generation, were also fundamental. Descendants of the enslaved spoke of women who disappeared during the night, of children born without identity, of muffled cries that echoed through the walls. These memories, preserved in chants and stories told around the fire, carried the weight of truth. Even without official records, oral tradition kept alive the denunciation of the torment of the night. The revealed room exposed the hypocrisy of colonial society. In front of churches, the plantation master presented himself as a man of faith, a keeper of religious rites, a protector of morality. But inside the big house, he maintained a space where sexual violence was practiced as if it were a natural right. This contradiction dismantled the image of respectability of the elite, revealing the deeply corrupt nature of their practices. The details revealed by these accounts are disturbing. They speak of narrow beds made of raw wood where women were immobilized, of whips and ropes kept in chests, ready to be used in case of resistance, of chains fixed to the walls as if it were a small prison inside the house itself. The Forbidden Room was, at the same time, the stage for sexual abuse and psychological torture. Every object there served the purpose of reinforcing the absolute power of the plantation master over the enslaved. But perhaps the cruelest element was the silence. The torment of the night left no witnesses. The victims were forced to carry the pain in secret, knowing that any attempt at denunciation would be punished with even more violence. The room, therefore, was not just a physical space, but also a mechanism of imposed silence. And this silence spread like an invisible chain throughout the plantation, reaching men, women, and children alike. The revelation of these secrets also brought to light the emotional weight the room carried. It was not just another chamber in the big house, but a symbol of slavery in its most intimate and perverse form. It represented not only forced labor, punishments in the stocks or at the pillory, but the destruction of human dignity in its deepest aspects. It was slavery invading the most intimate space of existence, the body. When these accounts began to circulate, they shocked even those who were already familiar with the horrors of slavery, because they showed that violence was not confined to the fields, the mills, or the public punishment squares. It was also hidden inside the houses, behind closed doors, sustained by the hypocrisy of those who pretended to be civilized. The revealed room exposed slavery not only as an economic system, but as a moral wound that corroded the entire social structure. It is important to remember that these secrets did not remain buried in the past. Many descendants of the enslaved still carry in their family memory the marks of this suffering. There are stories told in quilombola communities about grandmothers and great-grandmothers who were victims of the torment of the night. There are records of families who know their ancestors were born as children of silence. These memories keep the denunciation alive, preventing the forbidden room from being forgotten. And that is precisely why speaking about it is so necessary. Because slavery did not end simply with the signing of a law. It left deep scars that still influence the present. The revealed room is, at the same time, a window to the past and a mirror of the present. It forces us to face the truth that society tried to hide for centuries. And it is at this point that we move to the next chapter. Because after revealing the secrets of the Forbidden Room, we must understand how this legacy still echoes today. The muffled cries from the slave quarters, the forced silence of women, the rejected children of silence. All of this did not remain only in the past. They are invisible chains that continue to shape society. And this reflection leads us to the next chapter, the echo in the present. Many believe that the torment of the night ended when the Golden Law was signed, that the Forbidden Room was locked forever, buried along with the shackles and iron chains. But the truth is that the marks of that dark space remain alive. The echo of what happened behind the walls of the big house crossed centuries and still manifests itself today in social, emotional, and cultural scars. The past was not erased. It simply transformed into invisible chains that still shape destinies. The collective trauma left deep marks. The women who were victims of the Forbidden Room not only suffered in silence, but also transmitted that silence to the following generations. Fear, shame, and humiliation became invisible inheritances, carried as burdens by daughters and granddaughters. This legacy of violence contributed to the building of a society where the black female voice was systematically silenced, where dignity had to be painfully reclaimed. The children of silence, born of violence, also represent an echo that still resounds. The rejection and exclusion they suffered shaped Brazilian social structure, creating a division that persists to this day. Many of these descendants grew up without surnames, without recognition, without basic rights. And this lack of institutional identity became one of the pillars of structural racism that still oppresses millions of people. This is not only about the past. When we look at today's inequalities, we see the shadows of the slave quarters and the Forbidden Room. The difficulty in accessing education, economic exclusion, violence against black women, all of this is a direct legacy of that perverse system. The torment of the night may no longer occur on plantations, but its effects are still revealed in the statistics and in the stories of pain repeated in every slum, in every forgotten community. The echo of the Forbidden Room is also found in the culture of silence. Many women still fear reporting abuse. Many families still carry untold stories of violence, kept as secrets to protect the memory of their ancestors. This silence is the reflection of the slave quarters, where speaking meant dying, and remaining silent was the only way to survive. The forbidden room taught generations to hide their wounds, and that cruel lesson still resounds today. But it is not only the marks of pain that echo. Resistance echoes as well. The quilombos, born out of escape, are today living communities, preserving the memory, culture, and dignity of their ancestors. Every song, every dance, every preserved ritual is a cry against forgetting. It is proof that even in the face of the cruelest torment, hope was never completely destroyed. The forbidden room, revealed by history, forces contemporary society to confront its own contradictions. It is not enough to say that slavery is over. It is necessary to recognize that it left behind a structure that still persists, that structural racism, gender inequality, and the marginalization of black and peripheral communities are direct echoes of what once happened in the slave quarters and inside the big house. The silence imposed in the past still echoes in the lack of opportunities of the present. And that is why remembering is so necessary. Opening the door of the forbidden room today is not just revisiting history. It is understanding why certain wounds still bleed. It is giving a name to pains that were hidden. It is recognizing that the torment of the night was not confined to the walls of a room, but spread throughout society. Only then can we break the invisible chains that still imprison us. This echo in the present is also a call to responsibility. Every time we ignore today's inequalities, we are repeating the silence of the slave quarters. Every time we close our eyes to violence against women, we are keeping the door of the forbidden room locked. Every time we minimize racism, we are reinforcing the chains that have lasted for centuries. The past demands a stance from us. Either we break the silence or we continue being accomplices. And with this reflection, we move toward the end of our narrative. Because the forbidden room is not only a symbol of the past, it is a mirror of the present. The silenced voices, the violated bodies, the rejected children of silence, all of this still resonates today. But so does resistance, courage, and hope. And it is in this duality that we find the challenge of the future. In the next and final chapter, we will look at this legacy with clarity. We will reflect on how we can break the silence once and for all and transform the echo of pain into a voice of resistance. Because only then will it be possible to close the door of the forbidden room for good, not through forgetting, but through justice and memory. The forbidden room is not only a distant memory of the past. It is proof that power can hide behind closed doors, and that silence can be as cruel as the whip. Within those walls, women were violated, families destroyed, and lives scarred forever. But today, as we open that door through memory, we are breaking the pact of silence that sustained centuries of injustice. Remembering these stories is an act of resistance. It is giving voice to the women who were silenced. It is recognizing the children of silence who carried in their bodies the proof of a perverse system. It is honoring the courage of those who fled, resisted, and founded quilombos in search of freedom. It is admitting that the torment of the night left marks that still echo, but that cannot be ignored. And you, here watching this video, are part of this reconstruction of memory. Because every time a story like this is told, an invisible chain breaks. Every time a dirty secret is revealed, the dignity of those who suffered rises again. History cannot be erased, but it can be transformed into awareness, and awareness can become action. That is why I invite you, do not let this truth remain only within these digital walls. Share this video, subscribe to the channel, and help keep alive the memory of those who were silenced. Because only when silence becomes voice does the past cease to imprison the present. The forbidden room was a symbol of pain, but today, by opening that door, it can become a symbol of justice, resistance, and hope.